The most dangerous mistake is judging someone before you know why they walked through the door. The courthouse stood beneath a pale morning sky, its marble columns glowing softly as the first wave of attorneys, clerks, and visitors crossed the broad stone steps. Everything about the building suggested order, dignity, and fairness, yet only a few yards away, a growing crowd had already begun gathering around an unexpected confrontation. Two white police officers stood near the security entrance, their uniforms crisp and their expressions certain, convinced they had every reason to question the quiet black woman waiting patiently beside the inspection area. She carried nothing more than a leather briefcase, a folded overcoat, and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to remaining calm when others rushed toward conclusions. Her name was Evelyn Brooks, but no one in the crowd recognized it. To the people watching, she looked like another professional arriving for work on an ordinary morning. Officer Travis Walker glanced toward his partner, Sean Cooper, before looking back at Evelyn with visible skepticism. They had been assigned to courthouse security because of heightened concerns surrounding a major criminal trial scheduled to begin later that day. Every visitor was being watched more carefully than usual, and both officers believed strict enforcement proved professionalism. When Travis noticed Evelyn wearing a neatly wrapped silk head covering after mentioning that she had experienced a recent medical hair treatment, he questioned whether the covering complied with courthouse security procedures. Evelyn answered politely, explaining that she would gladly cooperate with any lawful inspection conducted respectfully and privately if necessary. Instead of accepting her explanation, the officers insisted that the covering be removed immediately in full public view. Several people stopped walking to watch. Cell phones slowly appeared above shoulders. The atmosphere changed from routine to uncomfortable within seconds. Evelyn remained composed. She neither argued nor raised her voice. She simply repeated that dignity and privacy should accompany every security procedure whenever possible. Travis interpreted her calm response as resistance rather than professionalism. Sean quietly agreed, convinced they could not make exceptions simply because someone requested them. Their certainty grew stronger as more spectators gathered nearby. Eventually, after continued public pressure and believing she had no practical way to avoid further humiliation at the entrance, Evelyn reluctantly complied with the officer's instructions regarding her hair covering. She did so without anger, without accusation, and without allowing frustration to overcome her composure. The crowd watched in complete silence, divided between those who believed the officers were simply following procedure and those who quietly wondered whether compassion had been replaced by unnecessary authority. Throughout the entire encounter, Evelyn never identified herself. She never mentioned her position inside the courthouse. She never displayed a badge, introduced herself as a judge, or attempted to end the confrontation through status or influence. Instead, she carefully observed every face, every security camera mounted above the entrance, every courthouse employee passing through the lobby, and every witness standing only a few feet away. Before collecting her briefcase, she looked calmly at both officers and spoke in a voice so steady that even the growing crowd fell silent to hear it. "Respect is never tested when everything is easy," she said. "It is revealed by how we treat people whose names we do not yet know." Travis exchanged a confident glance with Sean, convinced the matter had ended exactly as it should have. Neither officer realized that within a few short hours they would hear the words, "All rise, step into the largest courtroom in the building," and discover that the quiet woman they had publicly embarrassed that morning was not simply attending the trial. She was the presiding judge responsible for conducting it. 6 hours earlier, long before anyone gathered outside the courthouse entrance, Evelyn Brooks had begun her morning the same way she had for years. The alarms sounded before sunrise, and the quiet neighborhood still rested beneath the soft glow of porch lights and distant street lamps. She prepared a simple breakfast, reviewed the first pages of the legal briefs waiting inside her leather briefcase, and paused beside the family photographs displayed across the hallway table. They reminded her that every decision she made inside a courtroom affected real people with real lives beyond the pages of any legal file. Before leaving home, she carefully arranged a lightweight silk head covering over her hair. Her physician had recently recommended protecting her scalp while it recovered from a medical treatment, advice she followed without complaint or embarrassment. She believed that health, like dignity, deserved respect rather than explanation. The drive downtown took nearly 20 minutes. Local radio stations discussed traffic, community events, and the highly anticipated criminal trial scheduled to begin that morning. Reporters expected a crowded courtroom because the case had already attracted widespread public attention. Evelyn listened quietly before switching the radio off. She preferred silence before difficult days, believing thoughtful judgment required a calm mind rather than constant noise. After parking several blocks from the courthouse, she stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop where the owner greeted her with a familiar smile and prepared her usual order without asking. A young law student accidentally dropped a stack of notebooks near the entrance, and Evelyn immediately bent to help gather the scattered papers. The student thanked her warmly, never realizing the gracious stranger would soon preside over one of the most important hearings of the semester. As Evelyn continued toward the courthouse, she noticed additional security barriers surrounding the building and several patrol vehicles parked near the main entrance. The increased police presence did not surprise her. High-profile proceedings often required extra precautions. She simply adjusted the strap of her briefcase and joined the steady flow of attorneys, witnesses, courthouse employees, and members of the public entering the plaza. At nearly the same time, Officers Travis Walker and Sean Cooper received their morning briefing inside a temporary security command post established near the front entrance. Supervisors reminded every officer that heightened awareness was essential because large crowds, media attention, and public demonstrations could accompany the day's proceedings. Travis interpreted the instructions as a challenge to prove himself. Sean shared the same determination, convinced that strict enforcement demonstrated professionalism. Neither officer intended to act unfairly. Instead, they gradually allowed confidence to replace careful judgment, believing quick decisions always reflected effective policing. As visitors continued arriving, courthouse staff moved efficiently through security checkpoints while television crews positioned cameras across the street. The atmosphere carried a quiet tension, not because anything had gone wrong, but because everyone understood the importance of the trial about to begin. Inside the building, clerks organized evidence files, court reporters tested recording equipment, and deputies confirmed seating arrangements. Evelyn glanced toward the courthouse clock and smiled politely at the familiar employees she passed, never mentioning her title or expecting special treatment. She believed genuine respect should never depend upon recognition. Unknown to everyone walking through the plaza that morning, a handful of ordinary decisions, a crowded entrance, heightened security, and assumptions formed in only a few hurried moments were quietly steering several lives toward the same courtroom where patience, evidence, and character would soon matter far more than first impressions. The security checkpoint grew busier with every passing minute as attorneys carrying thick case files joined witnesses, courthouse employees, and members of the public waiting to enter the building. The steady rhythm of footsteps echoed across the stone plaza while television crews adjusted their cameras from behind temporary barricades. Officer Travis Walker scanned each person with growing confidence, convinced that careful observation alone could reveal who belonged and who deserved additional scrutiny. Beside him, Sean Cooper compared identification cards with the daily access list, occasionally exchanging quick remarks about the unusually large crowd expected for the trial. Their supervisors had repeatedly emphasized professionalism, patience, and consistency, yet the pressure to prevent even the smallest security incident quietly influenced every decision they made. Evelyn Brooks approached the inspection area at an unhurried pace, carrying her leather briefcase in one hand while offering a courteous smile to the courthouse deputy standing nearest the entrance. She placed her belongings on the screening table exactly as requested and patiently waited while they passed through the scanner. When Travis noticed the silk head covering once again, he paused the inspection and asked several additional questions about it. Evelyn answered each one respectfully, explaining that it was related to a recent medical treatment and that she would gladly cooperate with any necessary inspection if it could be conducted privately and with appropriate dignity. Several nearby courthouse employees looked toward the officers, expecting the simple request to be accommodated. Instead, Travis insisted that every visitor should be treated identically and that no private accommodation was necessary under the circumstances. Sean supported the decision without hesitation. The conversation remained calm, yet the atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable as more people stopped to watch. A few individuals quietly began recording the interaction with their cellular phones. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain whether they were witnessing routine security procedures or something more troubling. Evelyn never raised her voice. She carefully repeated that she respected the importance of courthouse security and simply hoped the process could balance safety with personal dignity. Her measured tone contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding the checkpoint. After several moments of discussion and believing that continuing the disagreement would only create greater disruption for everyone waiting behind her, Evelyn reluctantly complied with the officer's instructions concerning the protective head covering. She remained composed throughout the entire process, never attempting to identify herself by title or position, never asking for special treatment, and never reminding anyone that she worked inside the very building they were protecting. What neither officer realized was that several courthouse security cameras captured the entire exchange from multiple angles, while a deputy quietly documented the time, location, and sequence of events as part of standard security records. At that same moment, a courthouse clerk searched the lobby for Judge Evelyn Brooks after noticing that the morning judicial conference was scheduled to begin in only a few minutes. The clerk attempted to call Evelyn's office, but received no answer because her telephone remained inside the leather briefcase resting on the inspection table. Looking across the entrance, the clerk briefly noticed the gathering crowd but assumed another routine screening delay was taking place. Evelyn calmly collected her belongings once the inspection concluded, adjusted her overcoat, and looked directly at Travis and Sean with quiet kindness rather than resentment. Every difficult day gives us another opportunity to choose wisdom over assumption, she said softly before walking through the courthouse doors. Travis watched her disappear into the marble lobby, convinced he had simply enforced policy exactly as expected. He had no reason to believe that before the afternoon arrived, the same calm woman would step into the largest courtroom in the building wearing a judicial robe, transforming what seemed like an ordinary security encounter into the defining lesson of his entire career. Inside the courthouse, the familiar rhythm of the workday continued as though nothing unusual had happened outside the entrance. Clerks carried stacks of case files between offices, attorneys gathered in quiet conference rooms to review legal arguments, and court reporters tested recording equipment before the afternoon calendar. Judge Evelyn Brooks walked through the marble hallway with the same calm expression she had shown throughout the morning. She acknowledged every employee with a warm smile and thanked the deputy who held the courtroom door open. For a group of visitors, no one looking at her would have guessed that only minutes earlier she had endured an uncomfortable public encounter at the security checkpoint. She refused to let one difficult moment define the rest of the day. Instead, she focused on the responsibility waiting ahead. Inside her private chambers, Evelyn carefully placed her briefcase on the desk before opening the case file for the high-profile trial scheduled that afternoon. The courtroom assignment sheet clearly identified her as the presiding judge, and several handwritten notes rested beside the official docket. She quietly reviewed witness lists, legal motions, and procedural questions that would require careful attention once the hearing began. Her judicial robe hung neatly beside the office door, waiting for the appropriate moment. Before sitting down, she paused briefly in front of the mirror. The morning's security inspection had left her protective hair covering out of place, but rather than dwelling on the experience, she adjusted it with quiet dignity and returned to her work. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, Officers Travis Walker and Sean Cooper completed their incident log regarding the entrance screening. Travis described the encounter as routine and believed the additional inspection demonstrated consistent enforcement of courthouse security procedures. Sean agreed, remarking that public criticism often followed officers who simply did their jobs. Neither man considered that respectful discretion might have achieved the same security objective without drawing unnecessary public attention. Their confidence remained unshaken because they believed policy alone justified every decision they had made. Across the building, a courthouse administrator reviewed the afternoon schedule and noticed that Judge Brooks had not yet attended the usual pretrial coordination meeting. Assuming she had become occupied preparing for the major case, the administrator simply forwarded several updated documents to her chambers. At the same time, The chief courtroom deputy confirmed that all security camera recordings from the entrance remained archived automatically according to standard courthouse procedures. No one requested those recordings. No one suspected they would soon become important. They were preserved simply because the system performed its ordinary function every day. As noon approached, members of the public slowly filled the benches outside the largest courtroom in anticipation of the highly publicized proceeding. News reporters discussed possible testimony while attorneys greeted one another with practiced professionalism. Travis and Sean received notice that they would be present during part of the hearing because their earlier security report had been added to the administrative record connected with courthouse operations that morning. Travis accepted the assignment without concern, believing it would be little more than another routine appearance. Sean adjusted his uniform and confidently followed him toward the courtroom entrance. Neither officer noticed the brass nameplate mounted quietly beside a nearby office door. It read, "The Honorable Evelyn Brooks, presiding judge." Had either man looked up for even a moment, they would have realized that the calm woman they had underestimated only hours earlier was already preparing to enter the very courtroom where every person would soon rise as she took her place upon the bench. The courthouse clock quietly marked the early afternoon as sunlight filtered through the tall windows overlooking the main atrium. Outside the largest courtroom, anticipation filled the hallway as attorneys reviewed their final notes. Witnesses spoke softly with legal counsel, and members of the public settled onto polished wooden benches while waiting for the doors to open. The atmosphere carried the unmistakable weight of an important proceeding, yet no one seemed aware that another story had already begun unfolding long before the first witness would ever be called. Inside her chambers, Evelyn Brooks finished reviewing the final procedural motions resting neatly across her desk. Every page had been carefully organized, every legal citation verified, every ruling considered with the same discipline she had practiced throughout her career. She believed that every person who entered her courtroom deserved fairness regardless of position, reputation, or appearance. Before leaving her office, she stood quietly beside the window overlooking the courthouse entrance where the morning encounter had taken place. She neither replayed the embarrassment in her mind nor allowed resentment to influence her thoughts. Instead, she reminded herself of a principle she had carried since becoming a judge. Personal emotion should never replace professional responsibility. After placing her handwritten notes inside the case folder, she gently lifted the black judicial robe from its hanger and prepared for the afternoon session. Across the building, officers Travis Walker and Sean Cooper completed their final security assignments before reporting to the courtroom. Both officers remained convinced the morning incident had been handled appropriately. Travis even remarked that maintaining consistent procedures often required making difficult decisions, while Sean agreed that criticism usually faded once people understood the importance of courthouse security. Neither officer questioned whether the situation might have been handled with greater discretion or empathy. Their confidence remained rooted in the belief that authority alone justified every action they had taken. As they approached the courtroom entrance, a deputy greeted them politely and confirmed that seating arrangements had been finalized. Several attorneys walked past carrying thick binders filled with exhibits, while television reporters quietly discussed the significance of the upcoming hearing from the public hallway outside. Court staff moved efficiently between offices, ensuring every document had reached the appropriate location before proceedings began. Nearby, the chief courtroom deputy verified that all security systems, digital recording equipment, and standard surveillance archives remained fully operational according to courthouse policy. The routine confirmation attracted little attention because it happened before every major hearing. Yet those ordinary records quietly preserved the complete timeline of the morning exactly as it had unfolded. Evelyn stepped into the private corridor connecting her chambers to the courtroom, carrying only the official case file and the quiet confidence that came from years of service. Her pace never changed. Her expression remained calm. She understood that everyone entering the courtroom would bring different expectations, different emotions, and different assumptions. Her responsibility was to set those differences aside and ensure that every decision rested upon verified facts rather than appearances. Meanwhile, Travis and Sean took their assigned places inside the courtroom without noticing the brass placard mounted beside the entrance reserved for the presiding judge. Spectators gradually filled every available seat. Conversations faded into respectful silence, and the court reporter prepared the recording system. The deputy glanced toward the closed door leading from the judicial chambers, checked the courtroom clock one final time, and nodded quietly. Within moments, the familiar words spoken before every session would echo across the room, and two officers who believed they fully understood the day's events would suddenly realize that the quiet woman they had encountered that morning had been walking toward the highest seat in the courtroom all along. The courtroom doors swung open with quiet precision as the deputy stepped forward and spoke the two familiar words that immediately silenced every conversation. "All rise." Chairs moved softly across the polished floor as attorneys, witnesses, court staff, and every spectator stood together beneath the state seal mounted high above the bench. Officer Travis Walker adjusted the collar of his uniform, while Sean Cooper straightened the folder containing the morning security report. Both men expected another routine hearing before another unfamiliar judge. Their attention remained fixed on the empty bench until the private door behind it slowly opened. Measured footsteps echoed through the courtroom with calm confidence. A figure wearing a black judicial robe emerged into the light and walked steadily toward the bench without hesitation. Travis looked up almost absent-mindedly at first, but the moment his eyes met the face of the woman entering the courtroom, every trace of confidence disappeared. Sean turned beside him, following Travis's gaze, and his expression changed just as quickly. Neither officer spoke. Neither officer moved. Standing before them was Evelyn Brooks, the same quiet black woman they had questioned at the courthouse entrance only hours earlier. She did not acknowledge their surprise. She did not display anger or satisfaction. She simply reached the bench, placed the official case file before her, and waited until every person had resumed a seat. The silence lingering throughout the courtroom felt heavier than any accusation could have been. Several attorneys quietly exchanged puzzled glances after noticing the visible change in the officers' expressions. The court reporter adjusted the recording equipment, sensing an unusual tension that no one else yet understood. Evelyn calmly reviewed the docket before speaking in the same measured voice she had used throughout her judicial career. She welcomed everyone to the proceedings, confirmed the appearance of counsel, and reminded those present that every hearing depended upon fairness, patience, and respect for the rule of law. Her professionalism never wavered for a single moment. Nothing in her tone suggested personal grievance. She treated every participant exactly the same. As preliminary administrative matters concluded, Evelyn paused briefly before continuing. "Before we proceed," she said, "the court has been informed that an administrative matter concerning courthouse security occurred earlier today. Because it involved courthouse operations, I have requested that the standard records related to that event be preserved in accordance with normal procedure." The request sounded entirely routine to everyone except Travis and Sean. Both officers immediately understood what those words meant. Security camera recordings, access logs, and written reports had all been retained exactly as courthouse policy required. Evelyn continued without looking directly toward either officer. "Professional responsibility belongs to every person serving this institution. The same standards apply equally to judges, attorneys, deputies, court staff, and law enforcement officers. That principle protects public confidence in the justice system." Her words carried neither accusation nor condemnation. They simply reminded everyone in the room that accountability strengthened institutions rather than weakened them. Travis lowered his eyes toward the floor, replaying the morning encounter in his mind with a perspective he had not possessed only a few hours earlier. Sean quietly closed the report folder resting in his hands, realizing that what had seemed like an ordinary interaction would now be viewed through the very principles the court existed to defend. Evelyn turned another page in the case file before continuing with the scheduled hearing, allowing the law rather than personal emotion to guide every decision. At that moment, everyone present understood that the greatest authority inside the courtroom did not come from a uniform, a title, or a seat upon the bench. It came from the discipline to treat every person with dignity long before discovering who they truly were. The afternoon session continued with the quiet discipline expected inside a courtroom where every word carried weight. Judge Evelyn Brooks reviewed the first procedural matters with complete impartiality, giving each attorney the same opportunity to speak and carefully considering every motion before responding. Her measured voice restored a sense of calm throughout the room, and gradually the attention of those present shifted from the unexpected recognition at the beginning of the hearing back toward the responsibilities of the court. Yet for officers Travis Walker and Sean Cooper, concentration became increasingly difficult. Every reminder about fairness, professionalism, and equal treatment echoed differently now than it had only hours earlier. During a brief administrative recess, the chief courtroom deputy approached the bench and quietly informed Judge Brooks that the standard courthouse records requested earlier had already been preserved. Security camera footage from the entrance, visitor access logs, and routine incident documentation had all been secured according to established courthouse policy. Evelyn thanked the deputy with a simple nod before instructing that the materials remain available for the appropriate administrative review process if needed. She offered no opinion regarding the morning encounter and made no personal comments. The procedures existed to protect everyone involved, and she intended to respect those procedures completely. When the hearing resumed, Evelyn addressed the courtroom in a calm, even tone. "Every institution earns public trust through consistency," she said. "Rules matter because they protect fairness, but the manner in which those rules are applied also matters. Professional judgment requires both diligence and respect." Her words were directed to everyone present rather than any individual. Yet Travis found himself reflecting on every decision made at the security checkpoint. He remembered how quickly assumptions had replaced conversation and how easily a request for privacy had been dismissed without careful consideration. Sean remained silent beside him, reviewing the events with the same growing discomfort. Neither officer had intended to create unnecessary embarrassment, yet they could no longer ignore that professionalism involved more than simply following procedure. It also required thoughtful judgment in situations involving personal dignity. As the afternoon progressed, the scheduled case moved forward without interruption. Witnesses answered questions, attorneys presented arguments, and the court reporter documented every exchange with precise attention. Judge Brooks maintained the same steady demeanor from beginning to end, never allowing the earlier incident to influence her conduct on the bench. Her decisions remained grounded in the law, and every participant received the same respectful treatment regardless of role or background. Several attorneys quietly remarked to one another during another short recess that the courtroom reflected exactly what the justice system should strive to become: orderly, patient, and guided by facts rather than emotion. Near the conclusion of the session, the chief courtroom deputy confirmed that the administrative matter concerning the morning security screening would be referred through the courthouse's established internal review process, where all relevant records and statements could be examined objectively. No immediate conclusions were announced, and no one was singled out in open court. Evelyn simply acknowledged the update before returning to the final matters listed on the docket. Travis lowered his eyes for a moment, realizing that the greatest lesson of the day had not come from criticism or public embarrassment. It had come from watching someone who had every opportunity to respond emotionally choose, instead, to uphold the very principles she had sworn to protect. As the final motion of the afternoon was resolved and the courtroom settled into respectful silence once again, both officers understood that true authority was measured not by the power to direct others, but by the discipline to extend fairness and dignity to every person long before learning their title, profession, or place within the justice system. The courtroom gradually emptied as attorneys escorted their clients into the hallway for scheduled conferences while clerks organized the remaining case files. Judge Evelyn Brooks remained on the bench only long enough to complete the final administrative orders before quietly returning to her chambers. Her responsibilities for the afternoon had not changed because of the morning encounter, and she intended to ensure that every remaining matter received the same careful attention as the first. Inside her office, she removed the judicial robe and neatly placed it on its wooden hanger before reviewing several memoranda waiting on her desk. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. The chief courthouse administrator entered with a slim folder containing the preliminary documentation related to the morning security incident. Every item had been collected according to routine policy. The entrance security recordings, visitor access logs, written reports, and statements from courthouse employees had all been preserved without alteration. Evelyn accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. She thanked the administrator and simply reminded him that any review should follow established procedures without preference or prejudice toward anyone involved. Across the courthouse, officers Travis Walker and Sean Cooper sat quietly inside a conference room reserved for administrative discussions. The confidence that had defined their morning had gradually given way to thoughtful reflection. Neither officer attempted to justify every decision they had made. Instead, both carefully replayed the sequence of events in their minds, recognizing that they had become so focused on demonstrating authority that they had overlooked the importance of empathy and professional discretion. A senior supervisor joined them shortly afterward and explained that a standard administrative review would examine the complete record, not because conclusions had already been reached, but because public trust depended upon transparency whenever questions arose about courthouse operations. The supervisor spoke without accusation. "Good officers learn from experience," he said calmly. "The purpose of review is to improve judgment, not simply to assign blame." Those words lingered in the room long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, the preserved security recordings quietly confirmed details that no witness had fully remembered. They showed Evelyn arriving calmly, cooperating at every stage of the screening process, respectfully requesting additional privacy, and never identifying herself or attempting to use her position for personal advantage. They also showed that the officers had remained courteous in tone while declining her request without considering available alternatives that courthouse policy could have permitted under appropriate circumstances. The recordings revealed no dramatic confrontation, only a series of ordinary decisions that, when viewed together, demonstrated how easily dignity could be overlooked during moments of hurried judgment. Late that afternoon, Evelyn reviewed the administrative summary for the first time. She read every page carefully before closing the folder and writing a brief note across the cover. Every review should strengthen confidence and fairness through facts, consistency, and respectful treatment of every individual. She signed only with her judicial initials rather than her full title, allowing the recommendation to stand on its own merit. As the courthouse prepared to close for the evening, sunlight stretched across the marble floors while employees gathered their belongings and wished one another a safe trip home. Travis and Sean walked quietly through the same entrance where the morning encounter had taken place. This time they paused for a moment before stepping outside, looking at the security checkpoint with a different perspective than the one they had carried only hours before. Without exchanging many words, both understood that professionalism was never measured only by enforcing rules. It was equally measured by remembering that every person standing on the other side of the badge deserved to be treated with dignity before anyone knew their name, their profession, or the responsibility they carried. The following week, the courthouse returned to its familiar rhythm, yet the events of that remarkable day continued to influence quiet conversations throughout the building. Employees greeted one another with renewed appreciation for the responsibilities they shared, understanding that every interaction, no matter how ordinary it seemed, reflected the integrity of the institution itself. Judge Evelyn Brooks arrived before sunrise as she always had, carrying her leather briefcase through the same entrance where the earlier misunderstanding had occurred. The security checkpoint looked exactly as it had before, but one important difference could be felt immediately. Officers welcomed every visitor with the same professionalism as before, yet their conversations now carried greater patience. Their explanations were clearer, and whenever personal circumstances required additional discretion, they carefully considered respectful accommodations within established policy. Those small changes required no public announcement. They simply became part of a stronger culture of service. Inside her chambers, Evelyn reviewed the final memorandum prepared after the administrative review. The report concluded that the officers had acted with genuine concern for courthouse security, but had failed to exercise sufficient professional judgment when balancing security procedures with personal dignity. Additional training and policy guidance were recommended so that future situations would better reflect both safety and respect. Evelyn read the final page carefully before placing the report into the official archive. She felt no satisfaction in the findings because justice had never been about proving someone wrong. To her, Justice existed to help institutions become worthy of the trust placed in them by the public they served. Later that morning, Travis Walker and Sean Cooper requested a brief meeting through the proper administrative process. When they entered Evelyn's chambers, both officers stood respectfully, no longer carrying the confidence that had defined their first encounter. Travis spoke first. He acknowledged that he had become so focused on demonstrating authority that he had overlooked the importance of listening. Sean admitted that he had supported decisions too quickly without considering whether another respectful solution had been available. Neither man offered excuses. Neither attempted to minimize what had happened. Evelyn listened quietly until they finished. She thanked them for approaching the conversation with honesty before offering a simple response. Professional growth begins the moment we become willing to examine our own decisions with the same fairness we expect from others. The meeting lasted only a few minutes, yet both officers left with a deeper understanding of the responsibility carried by every public servant. As the afternoon sunlight filled the courthouse hallways once again, employees continued their work while visitors entered and departed without knowing the full story that had quietly shaped the institution around them. Evelyn paused beside the courthouse window overlooking the entrance where hundreds of people passed each day, each carrying unseen burdens, private hopes, and personal stories that could never be understood through first impressions alone. She smiled gently before returning to the courtroom, knowing that every case would bring new challenges and new opportunities to uphold the principles she had devoted her life to protecting. The marble corridors gradually settled into their familiar calm. The courtroom doors opened for another day of service, and the lesson left behind remained stronger than any headline. Authority may command attention, uniforms may inspire confidence, and titles may earn respect, but lasting justice begins long before any verdict is spoken. It begins with the quiet decision to recognize the dignity of every person before making assumptions about who they are, because the strongest court is never defined by the power it possesses, but by the fairness it extends to everyone who walks through its doors.